voice, my right. It's my vote, you can't deny it. My voice can't take it away. My right, I won't be quiet. It's my vote, my voice, my right. It's my vote, my voice, my right. My vote, my voice, my right. My vote, my voice, my right. My vote, my voice, my right.
Good evening. I'm Peter B. Collins with Greg Brockbank, and once again we are pleased to bring you Marin County election returns here on election night 2020. And Greg, this has been such a wild ride. First, I want to acknowledge that the national elections are a cliffhanger. And if you need a break from the stress of watching, I had dinner while I was watching election returns. That's a bad combination in a tight race like tonight.
I agree. I've been reading a lot recently about stress and how it's affecting everybody and how you're supposed to deal with it, like do more petting of your dog and go on walks and things like that. But it's true, people are stressed out by this election like no other one I can remember.
Well, and I had to save drinking for after the show tonight. So a lot of people who are at home can have a sip or two of your favorite adult beverage to help you through the night.
I think we've all had to do everything we feel like we need to do to keep our stress down to a minimal level, with success or not.
And Greg, I don't know about you, but this is the first time in my life, and I've been voting since 1972, that I did not enjoy the ritual walk with my dog to my local polling place this morning. Like most people, and we had 90% turnout predicted here in Marin County. That is an incredible number, but most of us voted by mail and dropped that completed ballot either in a postal box or in one of the many drop boxes, an option that wasn't available to many people in Ohio and Texas. And that's another indication of one of the anomalies of this race. I think when historians write about the 2020 election, the key signature is going to be, this was the election where there were massive efforts aimed at keeping people from voting. More than 300 lawsuits are still pending, Greg. The Supreme Court has intervened in numerous cases here in a confusing, inconsistent set of rulings. And the president himself has been injecting the idea of chaos and a rigged election and voter fraud for over 7 months. So all of this creates a very noisy situation where what we call the signal in tech talk, right? You got the signal, you got the noise, and if your signal's at 10 and the noise is 1, it's coming through loud and clear. But our signal is 10 and the noise is 9.6.
Well put. I agree with that completely, and it's a good point. It is true that among the many things in history that I think this administration will go down as, that's one of them that greatly threatens our democracy. Unfortunately, so many of us have gotten so inured to his activities that we think, oh, just what another Trump outrage of the day. It is very bad. Now, I think we can fix a lot of these problems. I've been on the Elections Advisory Committee in Marin for about 15 years since it started, so I thought I knew the nuts and bolts of elections. But in the last year or two, we've made a lot of changes here in Marin and statewide and nationally. And our polling places are no longer the same. I went to one yesterday to see it, and
it's a voting center.
Voting centers are where we're moving to in 2 years. This is kind of a combination.
I see.
There were like 29 of them, but they're fully staffed. You can register to vote. You can do anything. They're pretty empty. There was never any lines. I was the only one in there at noon on a Monday. I think it's working well. I think we have lessons to teach the rest of the country that vote by mail works fine, that counting up the absentee ballots before election day works fine, so you can release them at 8:05, as tonight when I went up there, as I do every election day, and get the hot copy of the absentee results, which pretty much tell us how all the local elections are going to go, and they give a clue on the state propositions.
Well, and this is the biggest opening number for the first round of results. 53% of the expected vote has already been counted. And I want to take a moment here to note that the current ratio is 86% for Joe Biden and just under 13% for Donald Trump. And I want to recognize that Marin County does have Republicans and does have Trump supporters. And so let me point out that I'm not actually a Democrat. I am a lefty, I am a progressive, but I am elegantly referred to as a no party preference voter. I would use the term independent, but we don't actually have an independent party in this state. And Greg Brockbank is a longtime Democrat. He has served in local office on the San Rafael City Council. Was it 18 years on the Community College Board?
Yes.
Yeah. And you remain active in local politics?
I do, and this elections thing is very important because it's making such big changes. For example, you've heard the numbers, about 100 million people voted in advance. That's twice as many as have ever voted early before, early in vote. So I think people are saying, well, let's do it this way all the time. Those are the big changes I think are coming, as well as voting centers instead of polling places. And I think we have a lot to teach. I think Trump is just blowing smoke, as most Democrats, I think, realize when he says, oh, it's going to be fraudulent if you vote by mail. I trust the mail. At least I did until this year. We got everybody so traumatized that it's fine, take it to a drop box. Well, drop boxes is that secure? I usually take it to the Civic Center and give it to the registrar of voters office. But they're so busy, I didn't want to bother them, so I took it into my polling place. One of my options. I'm glad I did because I like to learn how my polling place is doing.
Yeah. And Greg, this race is very close. The presidential race, the winner will not be known tonight. And even as the president has tried to kind of force the issue, and threatening that his lawyers will intervene. He has an even more friendly Supreme Court to work with than he did a month ago. And so we really have to brace ourselves. I think that we have many comparisons to 2000, where there are going to be efforts in the very close states to reject ballots. And we're going to see heavy scrutiny with teams of lawyers on both sides who are going to fight, particularly when you look at Pennsylvania or some of the other critical states like Wisconsin and Michigan. And so this may go on for a long time.
And this is the first election we've had two different groups of voters voting two different ways, and they're voting very differently. The Democrats are saying, vote by mail early, and they did mostly. And Trump was saying to the Republicans, vote on election day at the polls, and they did mostly. So what you have is the scenario where in some cases, but not all, the states are counting the votes that were done on election day first, and it shows Trump with a big lead because that's mostly Republicans. And then the votes start coming in for the mail ballots from Democrats, and Biden starts catching up, and Trump starts yelling, fraud, fraud, see, they're screwing with the election results. I was winning, and now I'm losing. Now, I still think, I've been predicting that Biden would win in a rout. It looks like I'm wrong on that. I was also predicting that I think we'd know earlier because I think Biden had a 2 or 3 or 4 point lead in the polls in Florida. So I thought we'd see Florida. I thought maybe the networks would call it, and then maybe North Carolina the same, and then that's it, game over. Trump couldn't possibly win. And I thought even if by some slim chance we lose them, he'll win the Midwestern states. Right now, Trump has a narrow lead in North Carolina and Florida, and the Midwestern states look like Trump has a lead because of what the network I saw tonight called the Red Mirage. It looks like Trump's way ahead, but Biden will catch up.
Yeah.
But we may not know for a day or 2 or 3.
Well, and the law is different in every state.
Yep.
And despite the Supreme Court intervention to either permit or deny certain deadlines for the return of ballots because of COVID and because of the unreliability of the Postal Service all of a sudden, it's a real mishmash. And Pennsylvania, notably, its state law did not allow them to open their mail-in ballots until this morning. So it's not even humanly possible for the final result from Pennsylvania to be calculated tonight. And yet the president was trying to create that perception. We also saw in 2018, Donald Trump did a kind of rehearsal for this in Florida, because Andrew Gilliam was running for governor, very close to the ultimate winner, DeSantis, and also Rick Scott was in a tight race for the Senate seat. And so Trump just arbitrarily announced, we got to stop counting the votes while the Republicans are ahead. Well, nobody paid attention to him, and ultimately both of the Republicans squeaked out a win. So it became moot. But it's clearly an idea that has been in Mr. Trump's mind, and I think he is ready to deploy that if the conditions permit. I
don't think he has the authority to tell them to stop counting. Elections have always been and still are products of the state and the counties. Did I misunderstand you saying that he would order the voting to stop?
No, he would go to court.
Yes.
the way the Bush team did
Yes.
back in 2000.
Oh, you're saying if 4 or 5 weeks from now we're still counting?
No, this week. So the other point I want to make before Congressman Jared Huffman joins us is that this election is defined by the silos of information. And Trump voters look at different information that they consider to be facts from Biden voters. And this divide, which of course is exaggerated by Fox News and the new One America network, really does make a difference. And one of the things that I think a lot of progressive and Democratic voters don't recognize is that conservative media demonizes Democrats as liberals, socialists, and communists on a daily basis. And they don't just set out to beat the Democrats. They want to, destroy what they consider to be the libtards. And they work at it every day. And the numbers show that there are a lot of people who are buying what they're selling. So with that, let's welcome Jared Huffman, Democratic congressman here in Marin County, also Sonoma and Mendocino and Humboldt, Del Norte, and is there one other in there? We didn't hear that last comment, Jared.
There we go. I'm unmuted now. It's Trinity County.
Trinity, thank you. And you are safely on your way to re-election. You have your own Harold Stassen who comes out and challenges you each election cycle. But we can comfortably congratulate you on another 2 years in Washington.
Well, I appreciate that. And, you take nothing for granted. Even if you're the Globetrotters, the Washington Generals could win, once in a while. So we play hard, and I'm really grateful to have a fifth term to be able to serve this great district.
We want to hear about your plans and hopes for the coming term, but I just have to comment what a difference. 4 years ago you were on this show and we were all totally slack-jawed over Trump won. No one saw that coming. What do we do now? None of us were very articulate. Now I'd hope to report to you a Biden landslide. I'm afraid I can't do that because we don't know yet and things don't look good in some respects, but I still think Biden will win. I still think he'll win big, and I still think the Democrats will get the Senate. Assuming that's true, what do you think? And if it's not true, what do you think?
Yeah, well, first of all, why should anything be easy in the year 2020, right? It has just been one heck of an awful ride. That's one of the reasons I was co-sponsoring legislation to prevent the fallback part of daylight savings time. I don't even want another hour of this awful year to visit all of us. In any event, I share your cautious and wide-eyed optimism. I think we are going to win the White House. I think we're going to narrowly take the United States Senate. And so I think we're going to have an opportunity in a deeply divided country to try to get some things done. And we know what the short list of top priorities has to include. We got to shore up the Affordable Care Act, especially if there's a Supreme Court decision that takes it away. We're going to have to get out ahead of this pandemic. We're going to have to rebuild the economy and make a big infrastructure play and do all of this in a green way that responds to the climate crisis. We're going to have to tackle racial injustice, and we're going to have to do something on immigration. And all of that has to happen pretty quickly because your political capital does have a shelf life. And as we do all of that, here's the trick. This country is way too divided. And we're going to have to find a way to show the country that there's a better type of governance, a better type of leadership. I think Joe Biden has the skills to do that. I think it's what he wants to do. So my hope is that we will be able to produce all those deliverables and more, while also setting a different tone. And I desperately hope, bringing an end to this toxic division in our country, or at least making it somewhat better.
Jared, I really applaud your strong stand early in support of impeachment of Donald Trump. And it was just a year ago that the Intelligence Committee's investigation exposed the Ukraine scheme. And as you may know, I didn't think that much of the Russiagate story, but I think the Ukraine story was quite substantial with real-time witnesses and documents that were stonewalled by the White House, but we know they exist. And I believe that there was a miscalculation because it was only focused on Ukraine, and there was criminal activity by the president that's proven by the Michael Cohen plea deal and his trip to prison. And so as we look back at that, and gosh, it seems like it was 4 years ago, but it was only last year, do you think that that actually backfired and hardened support for Trump that we're seeing show up in this election?
I don't think so. I really don't see any evidence that the impeachment moved the needle. I think the remarkable thing about the last 2 years, pretty much the last 4 years, is just how unmoving the numbers on Trump have been. I think people made their judgments about Donald Trump long ago and pretty much have not changed them.
I agree, and it's astounding. I heard somebody ask, did the campaign matter? Did it make any difference? Trillions of dollars, and people still feel the same way they did 4 years ago, the day after he was elected 4 years ago. Pretty much. Very little movement. Yeah. Trump's support eroded a little bit, but not much. And I thought it would fall much further, much faster, but it didn't. They were very loyal to him. If anything, they dug in their heels and became more loyal.
Well, I think the campaign did matter because there has been, some erosion of Trump's support among suburban women and educated white voters, but he has gained ground, weirdly. And I'll never understand why, but with Latinos and some African-American voters.
Jared, you are the chair of the House Subcommittee on Natural Resources. The title's much longer than that, but that's the part I can remember. And one of your key initiatives has been to try to block oil drilling in Bristol Bay. And it brought support from an unusual direction, which is that Donald Trump Jr. Likes to go fishing up there, apparently. And he came out and was publicly advocating in opposition to the development plan. Now, I bring this up because it's one of the few bright spots in the environmental picture, because the devastation of the agencies with coal industry lobbyists running the EPA, and exploiters, extractors running the Department of Interior. Talk a little bit about Bristol Bay, and do you think that it is safe at this point?
Yeah, so thanks, Peter. The threat to Bristol Bay is a project called the Pebble Mine. So I am fighting them tooth and nail on drilling in the Arctic Refuge and in the Chukchi Sea and in other parts of the Arctic. In Bristol Bay, it is a hard rock mining project that would be one of the biggest hard rock mining projects in the world, right in the heart of the headwaters of the biggest salmon stronghold in the entire world. There's no place like Bristol Bay on the planet. So it's a place worth fighting for. And it was unlikely bedfellows to find out that Donald Trump Jr. Was actually advocating to kill this project because he's got some hunting buddies that know this area. So I think it may be the only time I've ever found myself in agreement with Donald Trump Jr. on anything. I deplore him. I think he's maybe as reprehensible as his father or more. But you take your friends where you find them. And I am glad that, but here's the thing. Let's not confuse him or anyone in this administration with environmental champions, because the only reason this Pebble Mine got any oxygen in the last 4 years was because the Trump administration revived it. They brought it back from the dead. The Obama administration had done a thorough science-based environmental review and determined you cannot safely build this mine in this place, and it was done, and Trump brought it back. So, beware the greenwashing that has gone on around this issue and many others.
Before we leave, you have to leave us in a minute or two, I know. Let me ask you, speaking of environmental champions, it's not a secret to anybody that's been paying the least amount of attention that you are one of the best, if not the best, environmentalists in Congress. And I told you 4 years ago, just before the election, that, hey, Hillary should appoint you Secretary of the Interior, and you handled it perfectly. You modestly laughed and said it's not the right time or place. It is. Ryan Zinke had less experience than you do now, and he's probably younger than you are now, and he didn't last long. But you would be a great Secretary of the Interior.
Hillary should have appointed me Secretary of Interior.
One minor problem. But this time, if Biden wins, he can solve that problem by appointing a Secretary of the Interior. It would be nice. It would be good.
Well, you know, I would accept that if it were offered. I'll tell you what, though, I am very much at peace with the limitations of my white male status in this moment where diversity really matters. And I think the Biden administration is really going to be looking to fill a lot of these key positions with people of color and minorities, as they should. So I'm good with that. I've got a great position in the House, and whatever comes, we'll just keep doing the best work that we can.
Consolation prize might be staying in Congress another 20, 30 years, which would be great. We'd all like that.
Well, and if Biden is victorious, Gavin Newsom has a Senate seat to fill, and there's going to be an interesting competition for that. Jared, I want to note that one of the things that you've done that really impresses me is you're a co-founder of the Free Thought Caucus in Congress. And there's this heavy emphasis on an evangelical definition of religious freedom. And I'm all in favor of religious freedom, but agnostics like me also need freedom from religion. And with the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, we now have a majority that favors the use of religious liberty as a basis for outright discrimination against people who don't have the same faith background, and against people who don't want religious values to be imposed in a secular way. So I wonder if you'd comment on that a little bit, and how we honor and respect people with deep religious views while earning respect for our different views.
And I liked your picture on the cover of the American Humanist magazine.
Yeah, I'm really proud of that. I'm the Humanist of the Year in 2020, and I'm just very deeply honored. That is my novelty, I guess, in the United States Congress. I'm the one openly non-religious member. I'm a humanist. And my Free Thought Caucus colleagues and I are going to be very busy in the months and years ahead, because you're exactly right. Not just Donald Trump, not just a lot of Republicans, but now a supermajority of the Supreme Court has this view of religious liberty that it's a sword and not a shield. It is to be wielded to advance an agenda. And in the case of so many situations, it's to give people an excuse to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation, to get around the law when it comes to marriage equality, to advance this pro-life agenda that they have. So it's a disturbing moment, and I think our founders would be horrified with the way religion and theocracy have crept in to our civic discourse.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jared, as we wrap up here, tell us what your aspirations are, because now into your fifth term, you're building seniority. There is elderly leadership in the Democratic Party, and ultimately there will be turnover. Do you aspire to move into the leadership in the House?
You know, the nice thing about the position I'm in is that I knew what I wanted going in. And here I am 8 years in, and I'm arguably the #2 Democrat at the Natural Resources Committee. All I've ever wanted was to hold the gavel and chair that committee. And I am in a pretty good position to do that in the not too distant future. About the only other thing that I would aspire to, I don't aspire to, leadership titles within the Democratic caucus or anything like that. I'd like to think I am a leader in my own way within the caucus, but it's not by virtue of holding some title. But the only other thing would be, what Greg alluded to. If somebody wanted to make me Secretary of Interior, I would jump at that opportunity. But short of that, I'm just patiently waiting to perhaps hold the gavel and chair the Natural Resources Committee. That'd be great.
Okay, if that ever comes about, I will rent the horse for you to ride into Washington.
That would be good.
I would like that.
All right. And Jared, were you able to make any wine this year?
It's been a few years, Peter.
Oh.
It just it doesn't work with serving in the U.S. Congress.
I was going to say, I see the guitar in the background, or is that a virtual background?
That is a fake background, Greg.
I can tell by the way your hair is wavering.
Yeah, I'm shimmering and animating in weird ways. Sorry for that.
That's all right. It's nice. I thought you were off on vacation in a mountain cabin. Looks so nice.
A very nondescript spare bedroom if I don't have this fake background. So,
All right, well, he's Zoom honest, and we like that. Jared Huffman, reelected as the Democratic congressman from our district here on the California coast. Thanks for joining us.
see you both. Take care.
Good to see you. And I think we're ready for Mark Levine, our state assembly member from here in Marin County. Okay, we don't have Mark at this moment, but we have Stephanie Moulton Peters. And Stephanie, welcome to our election night coverage here on Marin TV. All right. She's in standby mode, and we'll mention that Stephanie was not on the ballot
there
today. She won in the primary. She cleared handily against two nice guys who ran but did not have her experience and political history. And Stephanie joins us from Mill Valley this evening.
Can I embarrass her by telling her how much I admire her? She and I were both elected together to our respective city councils in Mill Valley and Santa Fe in 2007, and we sort of bonded as a member of the class of 2007 of new city council members. And she's terrific, and I can't imagine a better person to go from being 12 years as a council member to the County Board of Supervisors. A very important position. She may not be as well known as Jared Huffman, but maybe we can start changing that tonight.
Well, what a nice thing to say. Gentlemen, it's so nice to be with you, Peter and Greg. Thank you for having me on tonight. I'm thrilled. In January, I will start my term as county supervisor for District 3, following in Kate Sears' footsteps. So just got back from Kate Collins' election party, the mayor of San Rafael, and Brian Colbert in San Anselmo, #1 vote getter. So
Great.
anyway.
Terrific, thank you. So what do you think about starting this new job? You've had a little break, unlike some people that are just finishing their sprint today on election day. You've had a few month break, but I'm sure you put the time to good use to learn about your new job, and maybe you could tell us about your priorities, maybe things you've learned from the voters, maybe what you'd like to accomplish in your first year or first term.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you both know, soon after I was elected in early March, the pandemic hit with full force, everything closed down. And I like to think that I still have my priorities, but added to them is going to be dealing with the pandemic and the economy and the county budget and keeping services in place as much as possible in the county. So the picture has changed dramatically since I was elected. And the good part for me is that, Greg, as you'll recall, you and I were elected just as the Great Recession hit. And so both of us have been through these very challenging, lean times, and we know how to make the decisions about resources and keeping things in motion as much as possible. So my priorities are still dealing with the danger of wildfire, the longer-term danger of sea level rise and climate change, as well as healthy communities, and then transparent, good government. So none of that has changed, but it all will be seen through the lens of the pandemic and trying to keep our local economy going and get it going stronger.
Well, and Stephanie, there are huge challenges ahead. There's still many unknowns because we don't know the outcome of the presidential race. We don't know if the Democrats will regain control of the Senate. But the failure of Washington to produce another COVID relief package puts state and local government at great risk. And there are likely to be huge cutbacks from the state that are going to ripple through the county. And you have minimal ability to deal with it. You have to have a balanced budget. Taxes are a very touchy subject with California voters and Marin voters too. And so this could be a period of severe economic retrenchment, and we could have a very severe second recession. And you don't have to take my word for it. The chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, has been very persistently warning Congress about the impacts if they continue to fail to provide more funds.
Yeah. Yes, Peter, that's absolutely right. And it is a dire situation. I have been meeting with county leaders, both on the Board of Supervisors, the county administrative officer, and the department heads. They are bracing themselves for the impact of another round of cuts. They're doing their planning. They are hoping that by the new year, there will be the next round of funding from the federal government, whomever is elected tonight. But it's crucial that.
And Stephanie, the other piece of that is the impact on people who are living on the edge, whose unemployment benefits have either been sharply reduced or don't exist. And there's a wave of evictions and foreclosures. I don't want to leave out small mom and pop landlords who are suffering because of the moratorium. It's a valuable thing that we have a moratorium on evictions. But if I'm a guy who owns one rental unit and my renter can't pay, that's a big hit. And so the failure to really find resolution to these serious issues, I think, is something that is more than just the Marin Community Foundation can help with.
Oh, you're absolutely right, Peter. And look, this whole economic dire situation we're in has also been used as a political football, I'm afraid, at the highest levels of government. And I expect we'll see some movement on that. I think the county has stepped in a number of ways with the rent eviction moratorium and rent subsidies and working with community organizations. But there's only so much a county can do, and we really need action at the federal level.
Yeah.
So I also want to mention another priority, certainly in light of the huge issue of Black Lives Matter. Today, the Board of Supervisors passed a resolution for support for the people of color and the community of color, and a complete lack of acceptance of the kind of Trumpian parade down Highway 101 this weekend that landed in Marin City and really caused a lot of fear and upset in that community. There's just no place for this kind of behavior in Marin County. And I intend to follow up on this when I'm in the supervisor seat. We just can't have this in Marin. We're better than that. And Marin City needs us, needs all of Marin County to get behind them and work through the issues of systemic racism. The county has plans in place to work on this, has been making progress, but a lot more needs to happen in this area. And I think most people in Marin County would welcome this.
Just to wrap up, I want to, with what Peter started with, is that everybody's seen the stalemate in Washington between Nancy Pelosi and Treasury Secretary Mnuchin. Now, Trump could have solved this real simply if he'd wanted to. He obviously didn't want to. Mitch McConnell would not let anything go through that has more than a minimal amount of funds. It seems to me that the most important missing piece of the proposed new relief fund that Nancy Pelosi was proposing, and had, of course, all the Democrats supporting it, was support for local government. And I think that will happen. It might be December, it might be January, but I think it'll happen, because otherwise, tell me if you agree with this description I saw a week or two ago, it's like the pandemic is like a hot air balloon, and we have to keep pumping more hot air into it because a side of it is collapsed. And the hot air, of course, is money. And if we stop pumping money or hot air into it, it'll completely collapse and fall apart. So you got to keep pumping money into it, or the whole economy will collapse.
Yeah, I agree, Greg. I think you have that absolutely right. Now, we've got to keep pumping money into the system. I think if we don't, the consequences will be far, far worse than what we're seeing now.
And I have one more, Stephanie. Today in the IJ, there was an opinion piece about the theological seminary in Strawberry. And that challenge of developing it with community approval is something that I did think caught Kate Sears by surprise. So you're well aware of the issue, and I'm sure that on the Mill Valley Council, even though I think that's unincorporated, you've still had some involvement there. Tell us what your thoughts are of how to properly develop that property while respecting the impact on the community. And I feel very strongly that we do need to support the residents there.
Yeah. You know, Peter, much progress was made through the Seminary Tomorrow Community Committee that worked with the developer for almost 2 years, trying to come to consensus on the kind and amount of development that would occur in Strawberry. And they got very, very close, frankly, much farther than in the past with senior housing, with new single-family homes, with affordable housing units, really a marvelous array, plus a version of the school that was there formerly as the Baptist Seminary. The effort did not culminate as was hoped. And so now the project goes to the planning department to potentially begin the EIR process. However, in my mind, there's still a large hole in what's being proposed, and that is the size of the school that is being proposed. And I understand there is no school selected yet. It's not hard to know, not easy to know the number of students, but I certainly think that we need an estimated size of a school population that can be worked into traffic studies and other studies that would be done as part of an EIR process, so that we have a whole project that can be looked at. I think there's still room for everyone to come together and come to agreement on a project. I myself am not clear about how the whole process goes forward, and I know the community is not clear about how the process goes forward. And I'm going to create some more clarity about that process if it isn't in place by the time I take office in January. I think we all have to understand the rules of engagement, and we all have to understand sort of what the process is we're going to be going through together to figure out what is the right project for this community. It's a once-in-a-lifetime effort. I think the developer has some very good proposals, but I do think more clarity and specificity is needed on everyone's part.
Supervisor-elect, how's that sound?
I'm liking it.
Actually, she's had that
Thank
title
you.
for some months now. All the others are going to get used to having the word elect tacked to their name since they're just elected today.
Thank you, Stephanie Moulton-Peters. Great to see you tonight. Thanks for Zooming with us.
Good to be with you both.
Okay,
Thank you, gentlemen.
great.
Thank you.
Well, Greg, one of the things we're seeing is that people have developed skills with Zoom.
Yes, indeed, especially really good people like that. We have a little time now, I think, before our next guest, Kate Collin, who I hope is on her way, but Mark apparently didn't make it. But do we want to talk about any of the other races? We have a number of guests coming up, including Kate Collin, I mentioned.
Alexis Feynman.
Hopefully Rachel Kurtz from the Santa Fe City Council member-elect, and Alexis Feynman from San Anselmo Council. And then we have Chance Catrano from the Fairfax Town Council, a new candidate and top vote getter. Paul De Silva from the College of Marin, a new candidate and top vote getter. And Edward Alfrey, a new candidate, top vote getter for the healthcare district. So we have a number of new candidates that it looks like they're winning, which is unusual. Yeah. Usually incumbents win most of the time, and incumbent and challengers are not that strong. We had an unusually strong batch of challengers this year, and some of them looks like they're going to win.
Yeah. Well, and why don't we take a minute here, because we will be joined at some point by Rachel Kurtz, who has, I think, pulled a surprise early lead in this new district. And this is another factor that is changing elections and politics in Marin. And people know that this was not initiated locally. There was essentially a blackmail lawsuit that was threatened by a legal mill, and San Rafael really had little choice but to adopt a district system. So the mayor is elected citywide, and there are 4 districts. And the only one that came up this year was District 4.
There are 2, but one of them was unopposed.
Ah, thank you. And so John Gamblin, the incumbent, is trailing. He's in 3rd place in the initial returns, and those initial returns are 68%. So it's unlikely that this is going to change a whole lot. And Greg Nell, who is very well known in the community, He runs a print shop and also has served for many years on the San Rafael City Schools District Board. I believe Rachel Kurtz has served alongside him there.
But Greg Nell even longer, and he has been an activist and with lots of groups, done lots of things. I would have considered him the front runner for that reason. Long service on the school board, long service on lots of other things, and he's raised the most money. But either people prefer women, or people know more about this race having been exposed to it. I'm not in that district, so I didn't get all their mailers and didn't really see the campaign. Apparently, I understood from secondhand or crossing emails or something that Rachel Kurtz put out a comparison piece comparing Greg Nell and herself, and of course she would probably call it a fair and objective comparison piece, and Greg Nell might call it an unfair and untrue hit piece. It's not easy to determine that. It depends on your perspective. That may be what elevated Rachel to the top spot. I don't know, but hopefully she'll appear later today and be able to tell us. San Anselmo was another example of all three incumbents running, but two very strong challengers. So I had no idea who was going to win, the incumbents or either of the challengers. And it looks like Alexis Feynman and Brian Colbert, two of the incumbents, are winning, along with one of the challengers, Eileen Burke. And hopefully we'll hear from one or two of those folks tonight, depending on our timing and the candidates' availability on short notice. But there's some interesting races here, and those last three I mentioned also featured challengers running against all incumbents, which is very rare, and when they run they usually lose, but in this case several of them are winning.
No, and it's interesting because Eileen Burke and Ann Politzer ran as kind of a challenging team, and Ms. Burke has an advantage with the voters right now of about 3 points, 3 percentage points. So it's interesting to see how voters process a new candidate. And of course, 4 years ago, Brian Colbert was the guy who kind of took the town by storm and became the first African-American city council or town council member in Marin County at this point. So there has been action there in San Anselmo.
I agree. There's a lot of interesting races. And the other thing I noticed, based on my experience, longtime experience for a decade or two as a member of the endorsements committee of both the Marin Women's Political Action Committee and also the Democratic Central Committee of Marin, the Marin Democratic Party Governing Board, is these are the two largest countywide bodies that endorse candidates in local races, and they're both very early on, in this case September. Some of the others come in weeks later. If you win both of those, you're likely going to win your race. If you don't, you may have a problem. Now, you don't always qualify for all. You're not a Democrat, you're not eligible for the Democratic Party endorsements. And the Marin Women's Political Action Committee, they recommend men if there aren't enough eligible women, meaning they meet their threshold issues. Anyway, but it's a complicated process, and this year more than ever, watching them, and also with the League of Women Voters debates, which I helped work on, most of the questions by far were about diversity and Black Lives Matter and being anti-racist and all these things which were not on most school boards' agenda and city council agendas 4 years ago, or maybe even 2 years ago. But it really says something about the awakening we have had as a society, including the cities and school boards and special districts of Marin, that we're dealing with this so extensively and heavily. And it's a good thing. So in other words, a lot of progressive positions are coming out from a lot of these candidates, and a lot of them are winning. So I think that's a good thing for progressives like you and me.
I also, this gets a little complicated, but we have the issue of renaming the high school that used to be called Sir Francis Drake. And also there was an effort, some people wanted to take down the statue near the Larkspur Ferry Landing, which some people believed was of Drake, but that is not actually a proven fact. And so I want to be clear that I fully support local self-determination, and people can rename the high school whatever a majority of the community decides to choose. But at the same time, I feel like these issues do divide the community in some ways, and that I guess I'd put it this way, that there's so many pressing issues that activists could lend their energy to, and honestly, fighting over the legacy of a guy from the 16th century who may actually never have been to Marin County.
And even if he had, he's an important figure, but sometimes their time comes and goes, or in light of new sensibilities, and it may be time to change it. I too favor self-determination. If people want to change the name, they should have a right to do so. I feel the same thing about statue topplers. Yes, there ought to be a commission to decide which statues we should have and which statues should be retired and replaced, and as our tastes, as our needs evolve as a society. But I don't favor it being done unilaterally by 10 people or 100 people or 1,000 people, with or without notice to the public, because that's not something that should be done unilaterally.
Well, and it's been exercised now, so I'm not sure what to make of that.
Yeah.
Also, I would just add my own opinion on the damage to the statue of Junipero Serra at the Mission San Rafael. I don't support that in any way, but I also don't think you can commit a hate crime against an inanimate object. I think hate crimes happen between human beings. And so far, I haven't seen the district attorney move in the direction of pursuing this as a hate crime, but it has been suggested by some people who were deeply offended. And I understand the offense they took. But we also have to look at the complicated legacy of Junipero Serra.
Right. I mean, first of all, the statue was not toppled because it was an anti-Catholic thing. The statue was toppled because he did a lot of very bad things to the Native Americans here. But at the time, I'm sure he thought, and all the other white Christian evangelists felt, that he was doing the right thing and trying to save their souls. He was wrong, we would think,
yes.
But that's what they all thought, so how can we criticize him for that now? Same with Sir Francis Drake. I mean, apparently his first 2 voyages as a very young man was on his cousin's boat, that it had something to do with the slave trade.
Right.
Was that Sir Francis Drake's decision? No, he was trying to be a captain and a sailor, and this was the job he could get from his cousin, and he took it. There's no reason to rename the road or the street or anything else.
Yeah, and at the same time, I do understand that there are residents of our community who have different feelings and who are deeply offended by this, and to be reminded on a regular basis, to see a figure who they regard as nefarious, elevated to sainthood, is, I can understand that people have those very strong feelings. But ultimately, I do believe that it's a community decision that should not be made in anger and on an arbitrary basis.
Speaking of anger, it's been a great thing to see the public so quickly support. It's a huge jump in support for Black Lives Matter protests and other social justice and fairness and equity. But of course, there's the problem with people getting confused with the rioters, which is an entirely separate thing. And I think we need to make more progress in separating that out. Everybody has condemned the rioters. Nobody supports the rioters, the vandals, the ones breaking windows and stealing things. So we need to make sure that people don't confuse, as they are now, oh, Black Lives Matter, those are the ones doing all those rioting and trashing and vandalizing, right?
Well,
no.
And Greg, that's coming from the president. And what I want to underscore is that there's been a detailed study of the protests from Memorial Day, when George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, through Labor Day. 96% of those protests across the entire United States did not involve any looting or any rioting or any serious attacks on the police.
96%?
96%. And yet there were numerous cases, and they're being sorted out in Seattle and Portland in particular, and Los Angeles too, of gross misconduct by police officers who were violently beating and arresting individuals who were maybe violating a curfew, but for the most part were operating as principled protesters. And so this has been politicized in ways that, again, as I mentioned near the beginning of the show, people have different sources of information. And, a lot of us don't watch Fox News and don't understand the constant drumbeat of the biased reporting that leaves people with these misimpressions.
A lot of my friends in a lot of groups all think that either Trump will win, I disagreed, or that if I do agree that has been trying to pull every trick in the book, and as you said just before the show started, he will now move to the courtroom and try every legal challenge imaginable. But he is really riled up in his supporters in ways that are horribly inappropriate in the history of our democracy. There's never been such a thing. Sunday morning, Stephanie Moulton Peters alluded to it, I was driving on the freeway and I saw all these pickup trucks with big Trump banners and signs and American flags waving. I thought, okay, they're on their way to the city or something. I had no idea they were going to Marin City. Now, it turns out they were quoted in the IJ yesterday as saying that, well, they were going from Santa Rosa to Novato, and they stopped at the shopping center in Novato. And then they went to Marin City. Why? Oh, to turn around. Does that make sense? To get refreshments. Does that make sense? They were just 15 minutes away in Novato, and they wanted to go to Marin City, where the several hundred of them filled up the entire parking lot, making the local populace of largely African-American people feeling very threatened, and some things got said and yelled and thrown, and it's not a good thing, as Stephanie Moulton Peters pointed out.
Well, and I believe some of those people worship at Chick-fil-A, which is in Novato, not in Marin City. Okay, we're ready for Kate Collin, the mayor-elect of San Rafael, who joins us here on our election night special on Marin TV. Kate, how are you tonight?
Great, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. It's so good to see you, and so good to see your large victory of, 88% among the absentees? I don't know what it is now, but not that that's a great surprise. You are not only the only serious candidate, you're an excellent candidate, extremely well-prepared, knowledgeable, active. You're a good leader. You'll be a good mayor, we hope, and good luck.
Thank you. Yes, as I've been telling people, now the real work begins.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
Well, but you've been doing real work for a long time, and one of the things that I'd like to single out is that you have put a lot of time and effort into dealing with the thorny homeless issues that San Rafael deals with. And my perception, I run a business in San Rafael. I live in the Ross Valley. But I feel like you and Gary Phillips, the outgoing mayor, have done an excellent job of working through these complex issues, not giving up, developing, I think, some innovative programs with Andrew Henning as the specialist on homeless issues that the city has on staff. And, I think that the conditions downtown have improved in ways that are clearly observable. So tell us what remains. This is not an issue that can be just put in a box and say, oh, we're done with that, we fixed it. But what do you see going forward as things that you will build on, or maybe some innovative ideas that you would like to try?
Yeah, well, I have to give a huge amount of credit, all the credit, lots of credit to the County of Marin, as well as our community-based organizations who provide services for the homeless. And it really all started in 2015, and their willingness to look at the way that they provide services and to change it. And that's not easy to do. It's never easy to change a system of care, and especially one as complex, to your point, as the one for homeless. And we're going to keep doing the same thing that we've been doing. It is very straightforward. The way that you solve homelessness is with housing plus wraparound services. And the services are obviously provided through grants and funding that comes through the feds as well as the state. So that is really our county partners that make that happen. And it's continuing to work with local landlords, as the county has, to find places to have people placed in housing throughout all of Marin. And I want to be clear, it's not just in San Rafael. But to your question, what are we going to do going forward? Well, first, just like all the other sectors of our lives right now, the pandemic has hit the homeless community just as hard. In that, the state had asked that encampments and places where folks were hanging out publicly couldn't be removed. And that was tied to actually the receipt of getting CARES dollars. So, of course, local jurisdictions really honored that. But that issue is letting people stay in encampments under a freeway isn't good for anybody. It's not good for the people that are there. It's not good for folks driving by, because everyone feels conflicted. They're torn by the sight they see that bothers them and the compassion they feel. So really the first order of business is on a practical short term is working with Caltrans. We've already started to work with Caltrans and the state as well. Senator McGuire has been amazing in bringing the right people to the table to figure out how can we address these freeway encampments. And in San Rafael, it's a handful, so we can get our arms around the issue. And I feel blessed in San Rafael and in Marin County that we can get our hands around the issue. We can solve this. We're hopeful to solve, working with the county, veteran homelessness by the end of next year. We're continuing to make progress on that. In terms of innovative ideas, it is consistently and constantly reaching out where people are. Some of the work that I've done in the past, again, with the other jurisdictions and my colleagues on other councils, is the Community Homeless Fund, which supports the mobile showers. In addition to the opportunity of folks getting clean, they can get into the system of care and get the assessments and start to get linked up. So it's using tools that we have at our disposal, continuing to use them well, and always looking what is going on in the nation. Are there other solutions out there? From what I've seen so far, Housing First, which is this approach of housing plus services, is what works. It is what's worked throughout the United States. There's no reason to move away from that approach right now. So right on the short-term docket as well is Project Homekey. There are considered sites by Marin County in San Rafael, Corte Madera, and Novato. So depending if one of those or all three of them go through, there'll be over 100 units of permanent supportive housing that will be added to our housing stock here.
Can I just follow up on that homelessness issue? Can I one quick follow up on that? I probably, most people were like me. They'd watch the homelessness issue get worse and worse every year and didn't see any real progress despite the best efforts by the city and the county. The county gets most of the money, city gets most of the bad effects. But I went to hundreds of meetings, even before and during the time I was on the council and afterwards, about a decade ago. But only in the last few years have I seen real progress, and I think most people have. It's great to see the Downtown Streets team pushing their brooms, and they're probably thinking, well, it's not so bad pushing broom. Look what I get. I get training and help getting a job, and getting people jobs and housing is the only thing that is going to make that number go down, as well as the outreach and the supportive services. And it's finally starting to happen, I think, a little bit, don't you? Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And since the switch happened, really the new paradigm shift in the last 2 years, 3 years, we, again, the collective we, the County of Marin, our community-based organizations, have housed nearly 300 of the chronically homeless. And chronically homeless are the folks that are hardest to serve. And they've stayed housed. Over 95% have stayed housed. In addition, it has meant that there have been fewer calls to emergency services. So there's all these other ways that we benefit, but we don't necessarily get the funding from that benefit to support the homeless. So yes, absolutely, we've seen progress. But I also have to tell people, we could house, let's say, so the last point in time, there were around 1,200 that were counted. So that was 2 years ago. But let's say we housed all but 5 people. But if you went to downtown San Rafael and you saw those 5 people, you might think, wow, we haven't made progress. So to me, part of the conversation is, and this was actually, I learned this a lot in the outreach I did leading up to the campaign and really heard this loud and clear. Kate, tell people all the great work that's being done, right? Because we only see those 5 people. We haven't seen the 300 or the fact that 300 have been helped. So that is something that we need to do a better job both in San Rafael and working with Marin County to really tell our success stories and recognize we still have more to do.
And Kate, I only recently noticed that the Starbucks at 4th and A had closed. Did they close up shop because of the kind of chronic homeless presence there?
I haven't talked to Starbucks directly, but they closed very early in the pandemic. So I actually think it was probably more related to that. Again, to that business model and not fitting into the business model. So. Okay.
So tell us a few other things that voters asked you to address as you were campaigning for mayor this year.
Well, the top 2, economic recovery, which is, that I have a background in business, and that was one that was already on my docket before the pandemic hit. So how do we support the businesses that can make it through the next 6 months, the next 12 months? So that is a big issue. I'm hopeful that San Rafael will move forward on an economic strategic plan. and really be thoughtful and deliberate about the businesses that we continue to attract here in San Rafael. So that's a big one. And it's not just San Rafael. It's all of Marin County, all of California, all of the United States. But there are things about San Rafael that are unique that we can attract businesses, biotech businesses related to BioMarin. I mean, there is a real opportunity here. Heard that a lot. And probably heard it because I was talking about it. The second one, obviously, during the campaign was around wildfire. So, we had the smoky days, we had the bad air days. So that is top of mind as well. San Rafael has an approved wildfire plan, and it's really accessing that funding that we're so grateful to the voters that they passed Measure C back in March. We'll continue to do vegetation removal. I'd like us to do in San Rafael some practice around evacuation. We need to know what to do, God forbid, if we start to have any sort of fire locally. And as an aside, I know you didn't ask, but I did look at the results so far in Measure R, which is the proposed sales tax for San Rafael. Does look like it's going to pass, which will help us not be in quite as big a trough as we're going to be because of the hit we've taken from the pandemic.
Can I just thank you before you leave for your work on climate change as well, a very important priority for nearly all of us, and we're really glad to see you talk about it and make an important part, and it's never too often to remind our viewers that San Rafael was the first city in the state to be accepted into the Beacon Awards program for greenhouse gas reductions about 10 years ago when I was on the council, and also to win awards in that category. And we were the first one in Marin to have a climate change action plan, and we continue to follow up on that and meet every quarter. And you chair that meeting, and I've been going to it for a long time, and I really appreciate that. Because I'm sure you'd like to be known as something other than the lady that's the mayor of the city that has all those homeless. You have probably broader visions for San Rafael that go beyond that.
Hopefully I was the mayor of the best city in Marin County. Just saying.
I'll take that.
Well, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to check in with you. I really appreciate it.
Well,
Thank
congratulations, Kate Collin, the newly elected mayor of San Rafael, California.
Thank you. Good night.
All right.
Thank you.
Let me just reset here as we head into the 10 p.m. hour. I'm Peter B. Collins. He's Greg Brockbank. He talks so much faster than me. We cut him off from the Red Bull a long time ago, but that's just the way it is. And I also want to acknowledge the great crew in our control room, Michael Eisenmenger, who is the executive director of the Community Media Center here, which is a great resource in downtown San Rafael, and our crew, which is Omid and Scott and Bill. And since I mentioned you, can I ask you to turn up the volume because it's a little hard to hear your directions coming from the control room. We're standing by here waiting for Alexis Feynman to join us. She is the...
or Rachel Kurtz.
Well,
Here's Rachel Kurtz.
We have Rachel Kurtz. So Alexis will probably be coming up shortly, and she is likely to be elected to a full term, Alexis, on the town council in San Anselmo after being appointed to a vacancy there.
But right now, if I could introduce this race, Peter mentioned that we now have districts in San Rafael pursuant to a legal threat. And okay, this is our first election with districts for San Rafael City Council, just as we have districts for school board on which you serve. And so Novato has about 4 bodies that have districts. But there's a wild 3-way race for this city council seat, including the incumbent and 2 members of the school board. So who could predict how that was going to turn out? So here you are, the top vote getter so far among the absentee voters. I'm not sure how the incoming voters. So tell us about your race, as well as what your vision is to serve on the city council and your priorities and what you've learned from the voters, maybe.
So as you said, we're still waiting for all the final results, but things are looking good and I'm excited. It was an interesting race, obviously, right? With 3 people running, both Greg and myself being trustees on the school board and John being the incumbent. So, and as you mentioned, the first time going into a district race for San Rafael. So the beginning part of the election was actually really interesting because there was a lot of education about understanding about district. And district elections. So we were doing some on the ground work around that. And then really the focus for me has been focusing on the issues. So still our issues around, obviously what's top of mind for everyone is the pandemic and the work that's going to have to happen right now. And so really my approach has always been similar to what I do on the school board, is working with the community and talking to the community and talking to the people. So you need me to be louder? Am I getting that message?
Sorry, that's for the control room. You're fine.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure who's getting that signal.
Thanks. We're all in Zoom hell. We just have to live with it.
Exactly. So I think that that's what the community is responding to.
And so tell us your experience now running a district race, because there are roughly 10,000 people who voted in this district. That brings the cost of a campaign down. It makes it much more of a community context where you're talking to people instead of people who live on the other side of San Rafael. So even though we felt that this division into districts was forced on the city by outside operators, what is your view? Do you think that this is a good way to structure our local government?
I think that it depends. First of all, I consider myself, although I'm representing District 4, I am a representative for all of San Rafael. So do we need to pause?
No, you go ahead. We're adjusting here.
Okay. So every council member represents for all of San Rafael. And yes, District 4 has particular topics. We know that the conversation around Northgate is a topic that comes up around for our area a lot, as well as housing and some other concerns, as well as environmental issues around where surrounded by open space. There's transportation conversations. So all of those are sort of immediate local issues, but they're also issues across San Rafael. And as a council member, all of us will be working for the benefit of all of San Rafael. In terms of the election, I don't know. I mean, I think it's, the district, the intent of having districts, the reason, and I know this from the work that we did with the school board, the reason of going into district elections is really to ensure you have representation for those areas. So that's, I feel that I am a good representative for our community.
Last question on this district issue, because it got me all worked up too. This first came up for me 30 years ago when I was first on the college board, and I was intrigued, and they all thought I was terrible for even considering it. Now that's countywide. You think it's hard running citywide, which I did 3 times in 6 years a decade ago, but running countywide for the college board makes sense to break that up into districts. When this came up for the city, I thought, well, gee, there's something nice about being attached to all of San Rafael, knowing all the neighborhoods and knowing the entire city, and have 5 people elected that are entirely elected by the city. Now, maybe some districts were not represented enough, and so you get somebody from your district. Maybe that'll provide a little more representation. Maybe it'll provide a better chance of getting a Hispanic council member. And guess what? It worked at the first try. But that was just the way things fell. But I worry that there's a balkanization, and that people say, well, I represent this district, so I'm going to vote and rule and work in this area. And everybody's working for their own area instead of for the good of the entire city. They'll say they won't. They'll say, no, we represent the entire city and we're going to do the... Sure, but it's hard not to be most responsive to the people that are voting for you. And you're only going to get campaign donations, for example, from the people in your district instead of the whole city because they're the only ones voting for you.
Yes and no. I actually was very fortunate that I got a lot of people, because I think a lot of people did recognize the fact that as a council member, we are representing the whole city, even though we come from a particular district. So I think that, and it's not one person's vote that makes something happen. You still need to have a majority vote. So we're all going to need to work together to identify how we move San Rafael forward in the issues that we're going to be approaching.
So Rachel, what do you see as something that's on your learning curve as you move from the school board to the city council? What do you see as the biggest challenges that you want to wrap your arms around and work on behalf of your constituents?
Well, I think for me, the business community. So we, finances, I feel comfortable with finances and budgets because we do that a lot at the school board, but our funding mechanism's different, obviously, at a school district than it is for a city. And so that's going to be a different community that I'm going to need to get better understanding and learning about, as well as real estate development work. Those are different areas. Now, fortunately, with the school board, I feel like I've touched on a number of different areas very focused around schools, bond measures, building renovation work, maintenance and operations work, working with unions. So I've worked in a number of different areas, but it's different. And I recognize that, and that is different. And fortunately, John Gamlin was the first one to contact me this evening and said, if you need any help, let me know.
Great. Well, Rachel, thank you for joining us. Congratulations, provisionally.
Yes.
You have a very healthy lead here, and I think it will be sustained, but we always wait for the certified results. But we really appreciate you joining us, and we wish you the best in your new position.
Thank you, and I'm glad it worked out that you sent me the message to join. So I appreciate it. I'm excited.
Great. Rachel Kurtz, likely elected to the San Rafael City Council from the new District 4. Great to have you with us this evening.
Thank you.
So I think that was very interesting, especially this district issue. And I want to second the concern that you've raised, because we've seen it in clear relief in San Francisco, where the supervisors, generally consider their district to be their turf. And it leads other members of the board to defer to them on issues in that district, sometimes at some peril. And in some ways, it makes the individual who did win in that district a little bit more of a major domo in that particular zone.
Yeah. Well, we have had some districts that have had individual districts, the Board of Supervisors, the Marin Municipal Water District, but really only a school board or two, but those are only a few. Now suddenly we're going to have a lot more, so we'll have a little better set of data to compare the advantages and disadvantages of district-based elections versus at-large. Now maybe we're done. Maybe this law firm that went through and threatened everybody with a lawsuit which could cost millions unless they switched over immediately, and of course everybody switches over immediately because they'd lose the lawsuit. We're only going to medium-sized and large cities, and Marin only has 2 medium-sized cities, Santa Fe and Novato, so maybe they'll stop and won't go to the smaller cities. I don't know.
Well, it's kind of like ransomware.
It is very much like ransom. But anyway, we should go on to our next guest.
Brian Colbert joins us from San Anselmo, and he appears to be the top vote getter as he is elected to a second term. Brian, great to see you tonight.
Hey, good evening to the both of you. Thanks for taking the time and having me on the program.
Welcome, Brian. We're glad to have you here. We weren't sure how your race would come out because I mentioned earlier there are, 3 incumbents, strong incumbents running for re-election, and 2 strong challengers. Usually you don't have strong challengers, especially when you have 3 strong incumbents that they're running against. But these were very strong challengers and could have won, and one may. And 2 of you have done well, you and Alexis. So tell me about your race. What do you think? What do you learn from the voters? What are your goals?
Well, I think from the voters is, I have a mandate to continuing partnering with the community to enact the vision that ties the best of San Anselmo and takes us into the future. So, the first thing I want to do is I want to finish Reimagine Creek Park. I've been a big believer that flood mitigation tied with the creation of a new space downtown is what will really jumpstart economic vitality. So that's highest on my project. In fact, we've got a brand new cafe opening in San Anselmo. I want to continue to push for pedestrian and bike safety. I think one thing we take from COVID is there's a lot of ways to get around our beautiful community and in Marin without jumping in a car. I want to continue to rely and tie in with our civic organizations to bring, vibrancy. We've got new downtown art installations going in, bring new events. And I think from an economic development standpoint, I think our real big advantage is our restaurants. We've got world-class restaurants. People love to eat. We should continue to build upon that. And then, the other things I think that, are built into Marin's DNA. I want to focus on continuing to protect our open space. I want to continue to address the public health and the economic fallout of COVID-19, fiscal sustainability, budget transparency. Everyone is rightfully concerned about disaster preparedness and fire prevention. But I think the most important thing that I think I've done with the community is demonstrated a willingness to listen and integrity. So the reality is, you don't know what's going to come up. There's a whole lot of smart and engaged people in San Anselmo, and I look forward to connecting with them and moving forward.
Well, as a town resident, Brian, I give you credit because you have taken initiative when you first asked me if I had any ideas about Creek Park, I thought, no, I don't have any ideas. I knew that for flood control that the Lappert restaurant was going to be demolished, but I had no vision for that space. And I want to acknowledge that you worked in the community, you talked to a lot of people, and particularly with the street closures on the weekends so that people can dine outside. The combination there, I'll just confess that we make a Sunday visit to Barton's Bagels almost every week, and it's really attractive with the picnic tables there. It's a safe environment, in terms of COVID, but I think it also makes great use of a space that was just concrete over a creek. And it was a zone where the creek would often get congested or backed up when floodwaters were coming downstream. So I give you credit for envisioning that and working to make it happen.
Well, Peter, thank you. And to be honest, that story that you told is heartening to me, because that's what we were hoping for. That's the vision, and that's the reality. So thanks, and I'll look for you on Sundays when you're heading down to Barton.
Can I make one last comment about when you popped in to this race 4 years ago, 3 years ago?
4.
3 years. 3 years.
Three, because I think they
that's
changed
right,
it. Yeah, 3 years.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, this is something new and different, but I was impressed with how energetic and articulate, intelligent, and how you connect with people and how charismatic you are. I thought, okay, this guy's likely to be good. And I remember talking to you privately and saying, I hope you will be a countywide leader, because some people just stick with their city council. That's right, they may be doing a good job, but it's nice if you can also serve on committees that help you get known countywide. And it seems like you're doing that, and it seems like you're doing a great job, and I'm grateful. And so I'm not surprised you're getting reelected. And at a very fortuitous time when, as I mentioned earlier in the show, America is, as always said, having a great reckoning about racial relations. And thank you very much for that. Oh, no, we want to have you to thank for that. What do you think about that, being in this place and this time as an African-American council member in very white Marin, and this time of great reckoning where people are coming to grips with the issues of past and present unfairness to African-Americans, among other people of color?
Well, I get asked that a lot. And I remember when I first ran, people would ask me, what's it like to be running as an African-American? Do you think you'll be the first African-American elected in San Anselmo or Marin County? And my response was always truthful and the same. I'm running not on the color of my skin, but on the content of my character, my energy, and my ideas. And the first time I ran, I was fortunate enough to get the most votes. And I think people really responded in the community that I wasn't running on identity politics, that I was sort of running on more universal values. And now the conversation certainly has changed. It's a bit more charged. But even now, I think the thing that I really stress is, let's focus on making San Anselmo welcoming to all. Let's not just sort of focus on how we can appeal to a certain kind of group of color of people. So, for instance, one of the comments that came up during this campaign, during the editorial with the IJ, is they were asking, San Anselmo is the whitest town in Marin County. What can you do to attract people of color? And some of the other candidates, their first response is affordable housing. And my response was, why is it every time you're talking about diversity, you're talking about affordable housing? Why aren't you simply trying to attract all people of color? Perhaps there are people of color that are middle class. Why not just focus on that? And I think that sort of message of universal values, of openness, a broad-mindedness is actually, I think, more responsive and what we need more than trying to balkanize ourselves.
And
that would be my response.
Brian, tell us a little bit about your position relative to the renaming of the high school that is on Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, but no longer called Sir Francis Drake, the school. It is contentious in the community. There are people with strong feelings on both sides. And ultimately, I believe that it is the right of the community to select a name. We saw the Dixie School District go through a long process, but I think that the outcome is satisfying to most people. There might be a few holdouts, but I think in general, that community took on the issue. There were some hurt feelings and some anger expressed, but ultimately, I think they arrived at the right resolution.
So that is a difficult topic, in large part because, as both of you know, I happen to be the only African American in the high school district, that's elected right now. So I'm currently the liaison between San Anselmo and the Ross Valley School District, and one of the things I think that's allowed to be an effective liaison and do some interesting things in partnership with them is to really sort of respect the boundaries between the district and the school. So I have not yet taken a public position on that, but I will say I think the process has not been handled as well as it could have. I think that there certainly is a certain portion of the community that is uncomfortable with the idea of covering up the name of Sir Francis Drake without a full public vetting of it. It certainly had the appearance of sort of stacking the deck in terms of the conversation. And I've been in public service not too long, but long enough to know that, particularly in Marin, where you have a highly engaged and informed electorate, that probably wasn't the strongest message. I will also say, it's my opinion that I don't think that the renaming of Sir Francis Drake High is actually, to be honest, on the top of mind of most voters. I think right now, as I've been out, sort of talking to folks, it really is what's going on with COVID-19. They've really been concerned with the public health implications, and they've really been concerned with the economic vitality. I've been participating in a couple county level committees focused on that. And I have to tell you, the people that things ask me about is, what can we do to help save our downtowns? The downtowns in Marin each provide a unique sense of place. And the concerns about winter are overwhelming. And certainly if you have anyone that's connected with anyone that's providing care or with the schools, I think those issues are really top of mind. So I've been trying to cast a broad net. I know that's sort of a very broad answer to your thoughtful question, Peter, but that's how I've been sort of trying to place this in context of the community.
Brian Colbert, thank you for joining us this evening, and you're in rotation to become the next mayor of San Rafael, am I right?
This is true. I am in rotation to be the next mayor of San Anselmo, an honor which I would take great pride and accept with great humility. And seriously, thanks to both of you for covering the races tonight.
One last comment about that you won't have anything to say other than nice things about your colleague, soon-to-be former colleague. As I said, this was an interesting race. 3 strong in various areas incumbents and 2 very strong challengers, considering all 3 strong incumbents were running. And I can understand you winning. I can understand Alexis winning. But poor John Wright, this guy's been in public office on 2 different school boards and the San Anselmo Council for a long time, over 20 years, has a dog park named after him at Red Hill, and he loses his race. Now, he only raised about half as much as the other 3 of you. Did he not run a good enough campaign? Maybe sometimes people get complacent and they don't campaign as hard as they should. They realize in retrospect afterwards when they didn't win. But it's rare for an incumbent to lose, especially a good, strong incumbent like John Wright. Any thoughts? Not that the challenger's bad. Challenger's going to be good.
Well, no. So look, I certainly do have some thoughts. The first is, I have to say it's a gold standard. We can get a park named after you while you're still alive
and serving on the council still.
Yeah, I know, right? And certainly, I have to admit, I've spoken to John tonight, and I'm sure I'll sort of be thinking, what happened and how that goes. But I'll be the first to admit, I don't have a lot of distance on this. I've told this story before. John Wright encouraged me to run for public office. And San Anselmo recently formed a diversity committee. And during that conversation, I made a distinction between diversity and inclusion. And the distinction was this: it's easy to say San Anselmo is the whitest community in Marin, and then you rattle off some statistics about the percentage of people of various colors or ethnicities. But to me, inclusion is, are you welcoming people and making them feel part of the community? And as an example of that, I speak about the time that John Wright and his wife invited myself, my wife, and my young daughter into their home to have dinner with his family and meet his friends. And then about a month later, I happened to be in the San Anselmo library, and a young man who was sitting in the library looked at me and said, "Hey, Brian, how are you?" And I said, I'm so sorry. I don't remember your name. I just meet so many people. And he said, "Oh, that's right. I'm John Wright's son." And to me, that's inclusion. There we were, two human beings, and perhaps I would say San Anselmo's greatest civic institution, the library. So to me, that sums up John Wright's character. So I certainly, the electorate has spoken, but certainly I feel a civic loss, and I feel a personal loss over the fact that he didn't win tonight.
Brian Colbert, thank you for being with us tonight on election night coverage here on Marin TV.
Thanks to both of you. Keep up the good work.
Okay, and in just a moment, we'll be joined by Paul De Silva, who has run an interesting campaign for a place where you used to serve.
Yes, Paul De Silva is a recently retired faculty member for, I think, 23 years. I remember when we hired him. I was on the college board then 23 years ago, and he's just retired. And he apparently has run an amazing campaign and raised an incredible amount of money, over $50,000, which is more than any candidate for any other office, and on a college board that's particularly remarkable, and running against all four incumbents, none of whom have raised much money to speak of, maybe 5,000 in one or two of them. But Paul obviously has a lot of friends with money and a lot of good supporters and endorsers, and ran a heck of a campaign, is currently the top vote getter. Welcome, Paul. Can you hear us?
It's Greg. Very happy to be here.
So what can you tell us about your race, your thoughts, and what you've learned from the voters maybe, and what your priorities are?
Well, it's been an amazing experience. I retired, as you mentioned, in May after 23 years of teaching at the College of Marin. Of course, the last few months were the beginning of the pandemic, and that was a unique experience. But even before the pandemic arrived, even before I actually retired, I was wondering what I could do to continue to help the college, to help education. I knew that I had experience that I could still put to use. So rather than just retiring and heading off and having fun, I thought, well, this would be one way that I could help in retirement. And I think in a more general way, over the last several years, I've been thinking, well, public good is well served when people with particular kinds of experience can put that experience to use in public office. And although I'm focused on local issues, I know the national and international scenes may lead us to think about that same concept. And in particular, as we delved more into the pandemic, I became more convinced that we were being forced to reinvent education, and perhaps this was a way that we could actually improve education in the future. Now, I didn't know, of course, when I began to run that I was going to be running in a pandemic. But as you mentioned, many people in the community, individuals, people connected to different organizations, former students, former colleagues, also elected officials, had encouraged me to act on this hunch that I had, that I might be able to continue to put my experience to work. And it was really an amazing outpouring of support. You mentioned the funding, over, I think, 130 different individual donors. I realized that as a challenger, I had to get my message out. I'd done my homework as a good student. I looked at what had happened in past elections, and it became very clear to me that challengers in countywide elections have to usually use at least one mailer to get their messages out. And those mailers don't come cheap. So even if we wanted to do it as economically as possible, we were talking about, just probably $20,000 to $25,000 in postage, right? And so before I committed myself, I wanted to get some assurance that I was on the right track. And with all the support, I really felt confident that I could go ahead and run a good campaign. I began, in fact, in August of 2019, planning the campaign, exactly the same time I announced my retirement. And I reached out to people in the community who had more political experience than I did. I had to admit, I'm a political novice. I'm a professor. I'm not a politician. so I did what people should do when they're aware of their ignorance, ask advice from people who know more. And so that's what I did. And I'm happy to report that I got good advice. And that's really what led to I think the success we seem to have had. Step by step, going through every month, built on what I learned in the month before. And when the pandemic came, sure, it was a challenge, but I think we seem to have mastered the techniques of Zoom and all the other things that now have become customary. And I'm thinking more and more that the pandemic has just accentuated some feelings that began to grow many years ago. I've been teaching for over 40 years in general, 23 at the College of Marin, as I say. But other folks have remarked that this is not only about 100 years after the last major pandemic, the 1918 flu epidemic. It's also about 100 years after we implemented what many people have called the factory style of public education in the United States. And I've been concerned about how education seems to have become more impersonal, more mechanistic. And I think maybe it's time to get back to a more humanistic approach. And this has been really brought out to me in my own experience as I compare different learning situations. I think about the situation in a large lecture hall, and then I think about the situation of teaching students in the field. And as we are now very aware, students are not really loving sitting in front of computer screens for 6 and 8 hours a day. And we have to think of what other learning experiences can we really fashion that will provide a much better alternative. And if I think of what kinds of activities we have done in the field, I think of projects that we've carried out. This, of course, can happen in the laboratory as well. It can happen in many different settings. But I'm thinking, hey, maybe we really have to get our creativity going, put our thinking caps on. And in the case of the College of Marin, I'm thinking of a wonderful opportunity that's coming up. The College of Marin was founded in 1926. When we get to the new year, we'll be just 5 years from our centennial. Let's project our imagination forward. What kind of a centennial do we want to have? I think we might want to put together a Centennial Committee right away and think about what kind of projects can we involve students and faculty and classified staff in that will help us. Maybe we can look backward a little bit. I've already talked to some of the history faculty. Why don't we get the students and faculty involved in writing a new history of the college? Maybe we could also involve students from different communities to write the histories of their own communities. We could think about that's in the social realm, in the biological realm. Let's be maybe really ambitious. Let's talk about inventorying every single living thing on the 2 campuses that belong to the college. Wouldn't that be an exciting project to get students involved in? So we can go on, and some of my colleagues have already started on these things. I talk about my I guess now former colleague, Nino Cucchiaro, who started the amazing paper airplane physics project down with the Sausalito Schools District. I propose adding a live hawk and eagle component to that to excite students. This is the kind of experience with real learning and teaching environments that I hope to bring to the board. And I hope to be able to complement the other wonderful areas of expertise that the other board members have, so that as a board, as we go towards the college's centennial, we'll be stronger than ever. And we're going to come out of this pandemic with having overcome a major challenge and having become much stronger for it. So that's, Professor, I guess what I envision for the future of the college.
Professor, it's a pleasure to meet you, and I wanted to ask if part of your motivation in running was to bridge any gaps between the faculty and the board. And I can imagine that there are issues that on the operating level that the faculty members are very well aware of, And it may have been difficult at times to engage the individual members so that they could understand the challenges that you're dealing with. And I believe there's a labor union that represents the faculty members, and I'm wondering if there have been disconnects that you hope to facilitate improvements in.
Well, I think there have been disconnects in terms of experience. And it's interesting that many, many years ago, I became aware of an effort, I think it started at UC Berkeley, to survey the ways in which colleges and universities were governed around the world. And some of the information that came out of that study, and I think there have been later studies done since then, that showed that the norm really around the world is to have mandated student, staff, and faculty representation on governing boards, so that there's an even flow of information. And I think that this idea of getting everybody at the table together really can bridge many gaps, because there may be a slight gap in perception or experience that later, if it's not dealt with at the beginning, can grow and grow and grow and then lead to discord. And so, yes, I would answer very affirmatively to your question that I hope that I can, through frank discussion with my colleagues on the board, nip any of those conflicts in the bud before they become real problems.
You say conflicts, maybe more like the appearance of conflict. I think there's probably a too common general response among people, including members of the board that I served on for 18 years, that there's management and there's labor, and we on the board are management, and the faculty and the other staff are labor, and there needs to be this separation. You're right, sometimes there's a disconnect, and sometimes we could bring those areas together as long as the faculty doesn't think, you're our guy inside now on the board. And you can get us better raises and working conditions. I don't think, hopefully not too many of them, if any, think that, because that's not your role in running for the board. And hopefully the board doesn't think you're a spy for the faculty union or something.
No, first of all, I think we have to talk about values. I would say that everyone at the college shares certain core common values. And that's why I would say that there are different ideas of how to do things. I have never criticized people. I generally point out to improvements in procedures. I think that also the faculty union has shown itself not so much interested in getting better salaries as really in improving the functioning of the institution as a whole. And so if you think about how much time in, say, the 4-year collective bargaining cycle is really spent on salaries, it's very little. And generally, I think that the salaries have not been a major focus of the faculty union. And I think all the faculty would, and I think this holds true for the classified staff as well, would just hope that all members, I guess you could say all of the employees, starting with the president, are employees of the Marin Community College District and would like to be treated fairly and equally.
We're talking with Paul DeSilva, who is likely to be elected to the Community College Board here in Marin. And Paul, I'm not bitter, but I'm still recovering from the demolition of that taco joint on the corner of College Avenue and Drake. Is the construction finished for now?
No, the construction is not finished. Tomorrow afternoon, I'll be at the public hearing for the new Learning Resource Center. I think I've been very open about my views on the construction project. I as a scientist, I agree with people who say that there is inefficiency in every process, every biological process, every mechanical process, and I would have liked to see would like to have seen more efficiency in the construction processes. I think that the major shock to me after the Measure C construction process was finished was that in many cases, although I have pointed out and recognized very well, there have been improvements in seismic safety, American with Disabilities Act compliance. Also, we could say better fire safety. In terms of the functionality of the spaces for education, there's often been a decrease. And I think this could have been remedied if people who actually work in the spaces, faculty, classified staff, and then also students had more say in the planning process.
No, wait a minute, we can't have that.
So this is, of course, something that I perceived in my own experience. I found that there was more difficult workflow. There had been less attention than I would have liked paid to adjacencies of workspaces. And I just wondered whether these were going to be, were these inevitable things? Did they happen at other institutions? And that's why I did the research that led to the Tale of Two Colleges report that I put onto my campaign website. This I presented to the board, I think it was in 2015. And I found that where it seemed that the colleges that did better in providing for better educational functionality were colleges that had a better culture of communication of needs among all of the different people working at these institutions. And so that's what I would hope for the College of Marin, that we could improve our culture of communication so that, for example, there might be, there's some really good stuff that's been done at the college for solar energy. And I just wondered if, when anybody thinks about installing a solar energy panel, well, would it be just second nature? It should be second nature to pick up the phone and call the campus electrician, call the engineering professor and ask, hey, what do you guys think about this? And I know from visits down at De Anza College, they did similar things, but they also were able to make those installations into teaching tools by putting up screens that would show exactly how much energy was being generated and how much energy was being consumed. So little tiny efforts at improving communication can provide big benefits.
Well, it's terrific. Sounds like you are not only obviously a very good professor, but you're also a very good student of and learn that what you don't know, you need to find somebody that does, as you said at the beginning, learn about it, how to be a good candidate for the Board of Trustees. And it sounds to me like you'll be a good trustee because you're asking all the right questions and have all the right goals, and hopefully it'll all work out as well as you're saying and anticipating.
Greg, I have one more question.
I remember you, Greg, as a trustee as well. And I have known many of the current trustees for many years. I look forward to learning from them and to working with them in a collaborative way. Thank you so much.
In your new role, how would you view a request from students for a reduction in tuition because of the shift to distance or online learning? You acknowledge that it's not, as effective as in-person teaching. So do you think that on a broad basis that there should be some reduction in the cost?
Well, I know that's exactly what the California State University students asked their administrations for. And I guess the main distinction I would draw is that of the total cost at the community colleges and at UC and CSU. So the total costs are much lower at the college and Marin and all the community colleges. So it wouldn't be that much. But I think the bigger concern of the college, and this has been sort of a more positive approach to that problem, rather than subtracting money from this being paid, the college has actually expended money in buying laptops and trying to provide more support to students who've had a difficult time connecting and staying up to date with their classes. So sure, there are a lot of concerns. I would always support looking into these questions the students raise. I'm not aware that any of the College of Marin students have raised that question yet, and I think it's probably because the total costs are nowhere as onerous as they are at CSU and UC.
Can I just add a note to that? When I first got on the College Board 31 years ago, it had been free, zero tuition for decades, forever. And I think $5 per unit had just been started. And when I got on the board, one of the biggest controversies was, should we raise it to $6? And I thought, well, geez, $5 to $6, what's the big deal? But I worried about the slippery slope. Pretty soon it's $20-something per unit. And while you're right, costs more to live and have room and board, and it costs more for textbooks, tuition is not the biggest part, but it's one additional part that becomes an obstacle for people of limited income. But I don't think it's something that the local college can do. I think it's a statewide decision, the tuition. They can't just suddenly say,
right. But of course, you've hit on a very important point. And there's a Nobel Prize winning physics professor, I think at UCLA, who makes the point that he came from a working class family and was able to go to UC. I think he actually attended UC Berkeley, paying no tuition because there was no tuition at UC either. And so he is really bringing home that question that he would not have been able to do what he did. He would not have been able to study at UC and become a physics professor, of course, win the Nobel Prize, if it had not been for the free UC system. And one of the big unreported stories in higher education in the United States is the defunding of higher education. So people are talking about defunding the police as a possibility, but higher education has actually been defunded already. And something that I think we really have to focus on in education in the United States is how do we view education in the context of the broader society? And one of the things that was really shocking a couple of years, maybe it was just last year, was the proposal to require all the community colleges to set aside a part of their parking lots for homeless students. Now, I remember some of us were talking about that at a faculty meeting, and we said, well, nobody's going to be against this proposal, but isn't it terrible that we as a society have gotten to the situation where we have to provide facilities for homeless students because they're becoming a larger proportion of the population? Also, the college has done a wonderful job before the pandemic of the Wednesday food distributions, and I've seen figures that in all of higher education in California, about 30% of the students are food insecure. So I think this is something that troubles me very much, that there are pressures from the larger society that are impinging on education in ways that are very, very difficult for individual faculty or individual boards of trustees or individual colleges to cope with. And so this is something I hope that we will be able to discuss as a society.
Paul De Silva, thank you for joining us, and congratulations. It appears you're headed to victory. And we congratulate you on that, and certainly enjoyed talking with you here this evening on Marin TV.
Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to a long and productive relationship in the future.
All right. Thank you very much.
Peter, you want to show a video?
Yes, we have a video package recorded earlier today of voters here in Marin County.
My name is Mark, and I was born at Marin General Hospital, and I've grown up here most of my life. I voted when I turned 18. That was about the time they lowered it from age 21 to 18. And I've never missed an election in my life. So this is the first time I've ever volunteered to be a poll worker. And finding out that they were keeping the polls open in Marin for 4 days was sort of an added enticement, realizing they probably need some help. So it's been a great experience, and people are amazingly enthusiastic about this election, and so nice when they're here. Everybody's voting in a different way, but everybody has been incredibly sweet, kind. Somebody brought food by for us today, and somebody made a post on Nextdoor recently, I think Saturday, saying what a great experience they had at this particular voting site. I think there are 30 in Marin County right now.
It's important. I'm more concerned about the local elections more than anything else. For instance, like the big one right now, I feel is like Prop 22, hugely problematic, huge issue for labor rights. I think that having, there's like what, I think it's like $180 million or something like that, or something to that end. I might be off by about a factor of 10 there, but I'm not sure. Like the most any group has ever spent on an actual like initiative in California history to try and get, Uber Good Eats, Lyft. They're trying to weasel their way out of having to actually treat their employees as employees. So that's a pretty big one. There's a lot of ads on that one, constantly being barraged with that kind of stuff.
I've been voting for the past 20 years now. And I think voting is important because we gotta think globally and act locally, and it's the fundamental part of democracy. You gotta do it.
I'm Peter B. Collins, along with Greg Brockbank. It's Marin TV election night coverage here for 2020. And this is the first opportunity we've had to review the current vote tallies statewide on some of the initiatives. It was a dizzying array that we were faced with. Greg, I'll start with a surprise that voters are narrowly approving the new bond request for stem cell research.
That's a surprise?
Yes, I was a big supporter of Prop 70, but that was at a time when the Bush administration was preventing stem cell research nationally. That's no longer the case. And I thought that tight-fisted voters would say, I don't think we can afford that in a down economy.
I wouldn't have been surprised if they did say that, because this is not the usual way to fund things like this, and it's a funny precedent to set. I don't know, I think people have a fondness for stem cell research, and they realize it wasn't getting done any other way, and maybe that's still true, and they could use more money, and but they were woefully light on specifics of what they've accomplished and what they hope to accomplish if they get this new funding.
Yeah. So Prop 15, I want to double check because our screen shows it passing narrowly at 51 to 46.
Statewide.
And I have on my iPad here, there has been a shift, and the yes vote has dropped below 50. It's very tight. 49 in favor and 51 opposed. That's the split roll to amend Prop 13, essentially.
We called it split roll for decades, and the Democrats really wanted to do something about it, but people were so scared to even touch Prop 13, the third rail of California politics, that they didn't dare. Finally, this year they dared. It took a few years. They got 1 million signatures. They got a lot of key supporters like the League of Women Voters saying, it's been unfair since Prop 13 passed 30-some odd years ago.
It's 40.
That they haven't paid their fair share of property taxes, and so this will fix that. It is a big new hit for commercial property owners, most of them.
And you know, I know Javier Becerra a little bit, our state attorney general, but he does frustrate me with the ballot titles that he writes. And this one was called "Change Commercial Property Taxes to Fund Education." And I don't think that that conveyed to voters the inequity that you just described. That commercial property owners, let's take Safeway or the old Long's Drugs, when those companies were sold, they did not get a reassessment. They packaged them in separate corporations to avoid reassessment, and that to me is just fundamentally unfair.
I've heard people complaining about Becerra's description of that measure, because nowhere in here there does he say it's a tax increase. He says provides funding for schools and local governments. That's true, and that's why we should support it. It's a good thing, but he should at least be honest enough to say this is a big tax increase.
So the attempt to repeal Prop 209 from 1996 is failing. 55 against, 45% in favor.
I think that was the original vote 15 years ago, or whenever, 25 years ago, when
that's about right.
Affirmative action was ended by initiative.
Prop 17 appears to be facing easy passage, giving felons the right to vote. The measure to allow 17-year-olds to vote in the year that they would turn 18 is failing, 54 to 46. The 19, which is the senior property tax assessment break, is narrowly passing.
It seems to me that that's for the benefit of realtors, so they can sell more properties to people that want to move, but they can't because they've already used their one-time lifetime exemption to a smaller house. Now they can do it unlimited number of times to unlimited number of counties, even if the property is more expensive that they're moving to.
It's passing 52 to 48 right now. The effort by police groups to amend the reforms that Governor Brown championed to criminal justice, in particular, what is or is not a felony, that's going down big time. The no vote is 63%. The effort to allow local governments to enact rent control, which in my view has been the subject of highly deceptive advertising, that is failing. Only 41% are supporting it. One of the commercials acted like the proposition had to cure cancer for people to support it.
I did some research on that one for the League of Women Voters and wrote an argument, and I have to admit it's a tough one. It's a close call, and I've been a landlord-tenant attorney for 30 some odd years. But I worry about the studies that show that it discourages the building of new housing, which we all desperately need, especially affordable housing.
But fundamentally, Greg, it just allowed local governments to write their own rent control legislation.
I agree.
Which is preempted by Costa-Hawkins, which was a Willie Brown napkin deal a long time ago.
And that's why ultimately I came down on the side of give the local governments the power, and maybe there can be further tweaking. And it's just I hate to subject local governments to that pressure of both pass rent control and the local landlord saying, no way, maybe there's some value in statewide. Now last year they did pass statewide rent control for the first time in history, and it does cap rent increases and does a whole lot of other things. But I think the promoters of this measure, mistakenly perhaps, thought, no, we want to give local cities even more power to pass even better rent control ordinances, but it lost 2 years ago and it lost again tonight.
So the big surprise to me, because the pre-election polling showed Proposition 22, the special interest measure written by Uber and Lyft, it's passing 58 to 42, Greg. And fundamentally, these businesses have been based on violating state and federal labor law from the get-go. And when AB 5, which was badly written, it gave them an opening, and they also ran highly deceptive ads, both online and on TV.
I know a lot of groups that are very upset about AB 5 because it really prevents local nonprofits, including theater companies that I'm involved with, from hiring people on an independent contractor basis. You have to hire them as an employee at what percentage of the time, with what benefits? We can't afford that. That's really going to ruin a lot of things. But I'm even more upset about two huge multi-billion-dollar corporations buying themselves an exemption for their workers. Now,
and think if they'd spent that $225 million on improving the pay and benefits for their drivers.
I agree, but they know they want to get the exemption to improve, to keep their billions flowing in.
And it's only short term, because as soon as robotic cars are available, those drivers are going to be toast.
That's right. This is but it's the precedent that bothers me. On the other hand, I'm bothered by the idea that I don't doubt their statistics that 3/4 of Uber and Lyft drivers prefer to be independent contractors. They may. So by voting no on this, we're telling them that we're outvoting you. You don't know what's best for you. We know what's best for you. I struggle with that.
But you can't carve out, there's no other job category that can decide what the law is going to be.
We've got to go in a few minutes, so we've got a national map here.
Hold on. Okay. 23 is the requirements for dialysis clinics. And I don't tell people how to vote, but I don't mind sharing how I vote. I didn't vote on this issue. I don't think it's any of my business. I think it should be decided by the legislature or through negotiation between the clinics and their workers.
I agree.
Prop 24, easily passing, 57 to 44. That's the online data privacy bill. And the effort to end cash bail. That is going down. 46% voting yes, 54 opposed.
I can't imagine why, since there's recently a consensus that cash bail is a bad idea, but people are so used to it. Well, that's the only way we stay safe. When somebody's arrested, they're obviously guilty, so lock them up and make bail so high that they can't get out.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, there are better ways to provide community safety and better way to provide for the person who's accused, sometimes wrongfully, sometimes who is innocent, to continue to provide work for their family rather than be locked up in jail where it destroys their family because they can't make any money because they can't afford the bail.
Well, and I'm surprised that voters rejected that, and they rejected the police-backed reforms or changes to criminal justice.
On the presidential race.
Let's take a look at the national map. We have been out of touch the last 2 hours, Greg.
Yep.
And blue.
I'm looking for the surprises. I thought the polls showed that Biden would narrowly win Florida. He didn't. Similarly, South Carolina, he didn't. Now, the three Midwestern states that surprised
went to Trump.
Yeah, Ohio, Biden was leading for a while earlier this evening.
Yeah.
The three Midwestern states that surprised everybody but when Trump won them 4 years ago. Biden had an even bigger lead in this year than Hillary did 4 years ago.
Right.
Right now they're listed as nothing, but I think that's because there was what one network called a red mirage. Trump has an an inaccurate lead because they're counting the votes first from the people who voted today, which is mostly Republicans, because that's what Trump told them to do. And the Democrats voted mostly in advance by mail, and those have yet to be counted. And then when they come in the next few days or week or two, Biden could well catch up in those 3 Midwestern states, and that could make a difference to the election.
And as we look at this map, I think the Democrats squandered time and money in Texas. I never believed that would go Democratic.
I agree.
I think Georgia is a lost cause because of the Republicans who manipulate the elections. So it's really going to come down to Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. While it does appear Nevada and Arizona may go to Biden and help him, it's going to take one of those 3 Great Lakes states to win the night. So Greg, it's been a pleasure to spend another election night with you covering the local races here on Marin TV.
Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed it, as always. This is we've all been so stressed, as I say, to get to the end of this election, and this is the beginning of the end of the election. We can relax and unstress a little bit, but we still have to wait a little longer for final results.
And there's a really nice Pinot Noir waiting for me at home while I go and assess the damage.
Okay.
Greg Brockbank, Peter B. Collins, thank you for watching tonight here on Marin TV.
My vote, my voice, my right. It's my vote, my voice, my right. It's my vote, you can't deny it. My voice can't take it away. My right, I won't be quiet. It's my vote, my voice, my right. It's my vote, my voice, my right.